Hello everyone. So just a little disclaimer here. I am not an expert survivalist. I am not an expert anything. I have done a little bit of everything. I have failed at a lot of things. I've succeeded at a lot of things. Anything that I tell you on this, it is not it is to be verified later. And mostly what I'm going to do in this video is give you ideas, because what I'm thinking is that I have been in almost all of these survival scenarios of some type or other. I have bushcrafted. I have moved out into a field and built, with the help of family and other people, have built a house out in the wilderness. I have lived in a homestead without electric, without water. I've been through a lot of stuff, and I can give you ideas of how to address almost any situation, but I am by no means an expert. The last time I moved out, I did everything I could to manage. There were 4 of us and some dogs, and we did well enough, but we had extra problems that hindered, and ultimately I got tick fever because the ticks were terrible that year, and I was sick and couldn't carry on. So more planning should have happened, more experience. It just wasn't set up right. We were struggling. So anyway, it doesn't always work, but some of these ideas may come in handy if you are in a disaster situation. And I'm doing this because really I am in New Mexico. I'm a long ways from the East Coast, and I really want to help anybody I can. And if you're a young person that's never had any experience with disaster situations, or you've never camped, or you've never experienced any of these things, and there's a lot of younger people like that now, even in a mountainous area, there may be a few people, especially young people, that just have never delved into any kind of emergency situation and don't know what to do. So this was the only thing I could think of to help. And if it helps one person, that's worth it. It's worth it to me. So before I delve into this, I do want to say that I'm going to link as many YouTube channels for survival skills, bushcrafting, and so on. I may have a few other videos to follow, maybe one on homesteading or prepping or even being homeless, to follow this. And like I said, I'm not an expert, but I am going to put links to other YouTube channels that will give you more in-depth information on each thing. So going forward, like I said, you can do your research if you have time to do research. A lot of this is shoot from the hip, especially right from the beginning, and I know we're, I think maybe, is it 12 days now, or we're over that first initial shock, but I know what it's like to live in the mountains, where you've got hills and valleys and hollers, and if those roads get blocked, there may be people way up, that, in the mountains somewhere that, are still stuck. And there's many people missing, and some of those, they may not have cell service. If they do have cell service and they can get this, at least they can maybe find other resources, and I'm going to share as many as I can at the bottom. But in hopes that this will be a help or an encouragement to someone, that's why I'm doing this video. And inspired me because we are from the East, and I'm in New Mexico. Can't do a thing in the world to help anybody on the East Coast, but I want to be helped where I can. So I would say that before you try any of these things, that you would verify my information and find other resources, but I can provide ideas. Now, whenever an emergency situation arises, even a small one, you know, you can have a child choking on something, or you can have the stove catch on fire in the house, you know, it could be an all blown out hurricane or earthquake. It could be all kinds of things. But when we go into a sudden experience, and I'm not going to edit this so there's going to be a lot of ands, ifs, and buts. You just have to bear with them while I'm processing. But the first thing you have to do is stay calm, and there's several reasons that you need to stay calm. Number one, especially if you are considered a leader, if you're a parent, you have children, or you have elderly, or you have people that are expecting you to help them know what to do. If you get erratic and you go crazy and you're like falling apart, then somebody else is going to have to step up and be leader, but there may be nobody else there. So the first thing is stay calm. And what this will do, it will allow you to think through what's going on. It will allow you to assess the situation, and it reduces panic not only in yourself but in those that are around you, and it will keep you from making mistakes. So I'm going to suggest a stoic practice that is called the gray stone situation. Just consider yourself a gray stone, and that stone doesn't show excitement, it doesn't panic, it doesn't throw a fit, it doesn't have emotion, it is just there. So imagine yourself as a gray stone, and you just sit there. Be calm. Then think, assess the situation, what's going on. Hopefully you can do this in a matter of seconds, but you have to stay calm. Okay, take a few deep breaths. Assess the situation. Don't rush yourself. Kind of stabilize. Now, there are situations if you are getting ready to go over a cliff, or the water's getting ready to, some things have to come by instinct. You don't have time for assessing. You don't have time to be calm. You have to have instincts. Now, if you have good instincts, which I generally do, and you can know, because if you're a person that drives a car or whatever, and you have to swerve away from traffic or whatever, you're going to kind of know if you've got good instincts or not. But sometimes it just takes instincts. You have to grab the baby before it falls down the steps, type of thing. But if you do have time, assess the situation, don't rush, stabilize yourself. And if you can see, everybody's going to know pretty quick if you are the leader of the pack. There may be two, mother and father, there may be two men or whatever that works together, but if you are in that leadership role, the first thing that you need to do is reassure everybody, because you don't want anybody else panicking and running off the pier and jumping in the water. You need to make sure that each person is accounted for. You need to make sure that each person is reassured, stabilized in some form. And as you assess each person, do they look like they're in shock? Do they look like they're in panic mode? Are they, some of them are going to jump right out there because there's going to be screaming and crying and all kinds of things going on. But you need, even the quiet ones, you need to check them. Make sure that they're not trembling. Make sure that their lips aren't turning blue. Really kind of look at everybody. Are their hands too cold? Are they staring out in space? A lot of things that can happen. Observe anything on each person that's with you that may seem abnormal. Okay, so as you assess each person, then you're going to have to prioritize. So, if there's somebody bleeding, you're going to have to take care of that before you do, you have to do the triage thing. You have to stop the bleeding, if somebody passes out, make sure that they're, whatever. do a triage. Take care of the worst situations first, but try to stay calm. That is like the most important thing, because you can't. And another thing you got to think about is you can't do everything on your own. You're going to have certain people, maybe you've got a wife, or you've got teenagers, or you've got other people that aren't necessarily stepping up and taking that leadership role, but you can delegate to them. You can say, go do this, go look for that. And delegation will come into play later. But as a leader, you can't do everything. You have to delegate some things. Go get a towel. Go get, this. Go get that. Or watch out for this. Watch this person while I go do something. Delegate to people that you feel are capable. And you might be surprised how capable even small children are at doing certain things. So try to delegate. This will get more done. But you have to, essentially in this first round of things, you have to stabilize, and then once you have stabilized the situation, then you can work on maintaining. But stabilizing the situation, making sure everybody's out of harm's way and that they're safe is the most important thing. I've got a dog under my desk that's growling because another dog's getting too close. Noogie, you stay over there and you get out of the way. You behave. So there is this mental health issue that's going to go on, and this is part of being calm. But you're going to have some that are afraid. You're going to have some that are panicking. I am really not cutting out any of this stuff. I've got shoes on the floor. I haven't done my housework because everything's been about this today, because I wanted this afternoon. I went shopping this morning, but I want to get this out as quickly as possible. And it's already probably too late for some people, but for some people it might still be viable. So you're going to have some that fear, that there's going to be panic, there's going to be stress, there's going to be a traumatic experience. Someone might go straight into some form of PTSD. But communication skills are very important at this state and time. Let me get this dog, because he's not going to stop. He's going to be bad. He's going to keep jumping on me because he wants food or something. I've been cooking rice and chicken. So, communication skills are really, really important. You don't want to be, screaming and yelling, and if somebody panics, you don't want to slap them like they do in the movies. You need to stay calm. There's no sense causing more disturbance. Naturally, you're going to talk to a child different than you do an adult, but make sure your communication skills are straightforward. Don't use complicated explanations. Use as simple words as possible. Make eye contact so that you're sure they're understanding you. And especially with children and pets, he's an ornery thing, is with, use low tones. Don't be rattling the cage any more than you have to, especially as a leader and a parent. There's, like I said, there's shock, there's fear, and there's grief, and there's despair. There's all kinds of escapism, disassociation. There's all kinds of really mental reactions that you can get out of people. And if you're not a skilled professional, especially with mental illness, you're not always going to know. But if you are intuitive or you are empathic, you can pick up on, if somebody goes over in a corner and they're just staring off in space, they may be dissociating, they may be in shock. You have to make sure that you support people like that. There may be one person that you can delegate just to go and hug them and hold them, or talk to them while you're tending to something else. But communication should be calm and straightforward and clear. Now, there are also things that's going to happen, like added disabilities. So you can have someone that maybe can't walk well, or that needs, medication, and that has to be dealt with. Or you can have someone that actually has, some sort of mental disability where they just simply are more like a child or an infant, and they can't care for themselves. So you may delegate somebody to watch over them, make sure they don't wander off. You may delegate to someone to take care of smaller children. You have to watch for young people, children, or really anybody that goes into this state of shock because they've seen really, really scary, bad things. There are certain people that are going to have PTSD to loud noises. So observing each person in your group is majorly important, and trying to deal with that in a soft and calm way is really, really important. Over time, you're going to come up with boredom and loneliness. So make sure that in your group, not one person is being unattended. Make sure everybody is getting a certain amount of socialization in the group or in the family. And also, when boredom strikes, because there's going to be a lot of detoxing from cell phones, detoxing from television. And this first off, you have to say, listen, you're not going to have cell service for a period of time. This isn't going to last forever. We will eventually get back to normal. But this is where delegation comes in. If a person that is completely addicted to their phone has purpose, maybe there's somebody that gathers wood, maybe there's somebody that gathers water, maybe there's some, if you can teach them skills that are giving, even if it's just for a few days, it's giving them value in their life. If you know them and they're particularly good at, communication, they can be one of those people that comforts. But delegate jobs out and try to keep people at least somewhat busy. This is really important. And then loneliness, that's going to come into play more if you are stuck alone. And I might touch on that in another time, but entertaining yourself in down times is, a way of doing that. Okay, so when I first moved out on the homestead, we had 2 small children. One was 3, one was 4, and my mother was 70 some years old at the time, 72 I think. And we knew when we went out there that we were going to have to make arrangements. Joseph had cerebral palsy and autism. There were special needs with both of the children. And you can deal with these things, but you do have to plan ahead and you have to think. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about children and infants. First off, with them, you have to make sure they are safe. If they're toddlers, they're going to have to be tended to. If you don't have a playpen or a bed or some kind of fencing or child safe protection, they're going to have to be tended to. They're going to have eyes on them at all times. And in this modern age, we, as mothers, we are not prepared for this because we're used to having playpens and all of that stuff. But if you are near the woods or near the water, or you are just out in a place where they could wander off, you're going to have eyes on, hands on all the time. And this can make it difficult. There's certain ways, and I may find something in a video, or to gently restrain them. There's certain things that you can do, but children will wander off. Children do not perceive danger like we do. And so there is no replacement for constantly observing them and having hands on all the time. Take no chances. If you're walking somewhere, don't let them walk behind. Make them walk in front so that you can see what's going on. Okay, So again, reassurance. Now, this is another thing we fail on a lot in this day and time, but children need connection. They need bonding. And especially in a time where things are strained and fearful, and I know this is asking a lot, but listen, our children come first. So children need to be touched. They need to be held. They need to be reassured by someone that they feel completely and utterly safe with. So that's generally going to be mom, dad, or grandparents, or somebody that's really, really close to them. But they do have to have that physical connection and comfort. Comfort also comes in the way of making sure they're not cold, making sure they're not too hot, making sure they're not wet. No diaper at all is better than a wet diaper. If, you know, I know that this is controversial, but you do not want a child wearing a wet or a dirty diaper for an extended period of time. Clean them up. Let them run without one if you have to, or wrap them up with some kind of a rag. Do something, but do not let their skin on their backside be in contact with acidic or, you know, poo or pee in the diaper for an extended period of time. Make sure that they're getting food and water. Now, if you are a nursing mother and you're having trouble getting a hold of formula, and your baby's just a few months old, very, very likely, if you let the baby nurse, you will be able to bring your milk production back. It will be slow, it will be painful, it'll be an effort. The child may refuse to nurse or latch on, but if the child's hungry, there may be some hope there. So don't give up on breastfeeding if you can't get a hold of formula. Sanitation. Make sure that their diaper area stays clean, even if it's just with pure water. So I mentioned screen detox. This is going to be a real thing. We don't realize how addicted we are to screens, televisions, computers, cell phones, you know, tablets. This is a real thing, and it's a real thing from adults down to children. And this is going to be, especially when you think about teenagers being cut off from their friends and their social media and all of that, it's going to be a real thing. Now, I would make a couple of suggestions on this. Don't be too harsh. You may be suffering from some of it yourself, because we may complain about our kids staring at the phone all the time, or our husbands, but I know I stay on my phone a whole lot too. So the best thing to do is be calm and tell them, be understanding. Say, I know this is hard. This is hard for me too. But let's try to be creative. Let's try to find other ways to entertain ourselves. And even out in nature, sometimes you can, draw pictures in the sand or whatever that you're going to do. But it will open up a new world, but it can be very painful. And it can cause physiological issues. Anxiety, nausea, headache, all sorts of stresses. So be gentle. The rule of thumb is to always be gentle. Always be gentle. No yelling, no making things more stressful than you need to do. And then there is the need for education. So during this time, the kids won't be in school, more than likely. You're not going to have access to education, but you can create educational things that they can learn. Learning trees, learning plants, learning how to do certain skills that they've never been exposed to. Try to create a learning experience, because the one thing about kids is same is good. A lot of kids, especially, they don't like change. So they're not sleeping in their bed, they're not connected with their friends. This is a huge amount of change. And you may have kids that are just real easygoing and they just go with it, or they've had some experience with this stuff. But then again, you may have a kid, this is just like throwing them out of a nice warm bed into a tub of ice. It is just going to be such a shock. So my thoughts are, please just be patient and understand that this is difficult and it's a transition, and children of all ages and adults need to feel like they're in a safe space. And if you're freaking out, or if you're yelling, or you're just causing more disruption, so don't do that. All right, so moving on, we're going to talk about some of the main things that you need to think about. One of those is trying to get the dogs to behave. So one of those things is sheltering in place. So why would you shelter in place? Well, first of all, sometimes you're blocked off from roads. The roads are blocked, and like in North Carolina, the roads are blocked. People can't get out of the hollers. They can't get, whole cities are blocked off and they can't get into them. So that's one reason to shelter in place. Another reason to shelter in place is because if you don't know where you're at and you go wandering around, you can make a matter way worse. And if rescuers are coming, people are coming to search for you, they're going to look for houses, they're going to look for signs of life. If you're out in the middle of the woods with a canopy cover, they can't see anything, they're not going to know you're there. It could make things way worse. So sheltering in place 99% of the time is going to be the thing to do. But I'm going to name off a few things that you need to do as you shelter in place. Say, for instance, you're in your house. And that would be the ideal thing, but you're going to have to check for safety. So some of those are the actual structure of the house. Naturally, if your house is on the edge of a cliff, it could fall over, or the undergirding of it, or the foundation of it's washed away and it could fall. Structural damage, look for structural damage. If there is structural damage, you are not going to want to stay in the house. If it could collapse, you do not want to stay in the house. Now, there may be some scenarios where most of the house is essentially uninhabitable, windows broken out or something like that, but you have a kitchen with a back door that seems stable enough, and there's no real problems in it. You might be able to shelter in one room. If there is something going on, like you may have to block the door off going into the rest of the house if the wind's blowing through, or there might be situations. Always use common sense and prioritize. Try to be level-headed in these things. But if you have one room that you can shelter in, that's good. If the house is simply structurally not safe, the second thing that you might want to consider is actually camping in the yard. Because being out in the open where people that are looking to rescue can see signs of life is ideal. They're going to look for houses. Again, don't wander off in the woods thinking that you're going to get to a specific place, because something could happen, you could get hurt, they would never find you. Okay, so I will say again that if at all possible for you to leave, especially an unstructural house, you have no survival skills, you have no supplies in place, you need to vacate the premises. If rescuers come along, you need to go. I know that some people are so afraid that their stuff is going to be looted and they're going to be robbed or something, so they will make up their mind they're gonna stand their ground, they're not gonna leave. But especially if you have children or younger people or medical needs or something, you do need to accept the help and leave your home behind rather than stay there and lose your life because you're exposed or you're sick or something like that. But until rescuers come, you need to shelter in place. Now, sheltering in place is good if you have a house and you can go through the house and you can get supplies, you can get canned goods, you can get blankets. All of that stuff makes it easier. You may not have that option, and you're going to have to be more rustic or primitive or bushcrafty about your survival skills. But some of the things that you need, if you are in the house, you're going to need to look for a few things. You need to look for toxic water that may be infiltrating your house in some way. If you're close to the flood waters or whatever, you need to look for any kind of gas pipes, natural gas pipes, propane tanks, or anything that could be leaking. Always be aware of odd smells. You need to watch for fallen trees, or more specifically widowmakers, which are trees that are about to fall. So if you're in a house and it's in perfect shape, but you've got this huge oak tree out in the front yard and it's leaning, or it looks like it at all may fall, you do not want to be there. Cars can be an option for sleeping in the dry, but you again need to make sure that they're clean, they're safe. You don't need to run them, of course. And they're not under no trees that are going to fall under them. You do need an exterior door, so in case for some reason the house was to catch on fire, you don't want to be in a room blocked off where you don't have an exterior, you don't have an exit. You need to be able to get out of it. And like I said, you may want to block off portions of the house that you feel like are unsafe. Now, if you choose to camp outside your house, one thing to think about is you do want a little bit higher elevation. And with the floods that just come, you definitely don't want to be someplace where the water is saturated with toxic, river water or whatever. You want to be on a higher plane, a higher level, just in case more rain comes or somehow there's some kind of toxins in the mud or whatever. You do want to stay away from mud, and I know people let their kids play in mud and they think mud's all kinds of fun and everything. The one time I let my kids totally play in the mud, they both got sick, and they were sick for a long time. Mud does have pathogens, chemicals, all sorts of uncleanness can be in mud, so you need to try to avoid it. Okay, so get a higher elevation. If you are close to your house, get supplies out of the house. That's going to make this better. If you have been somewhat of a prepper, or you're just a collector of things, that's all the better, because you may have old tarps around, you may have ropes and all that. So if you have access to some of these things, it's going to be better. Pick, as far as you can, a dry spot, and then try to find a spot that maybe the weeds and things aren't. It's my experience you're better off to be out in the open than you are under the trees, because even small trees can fall, and without a substantial shelter, you can get really, really hurt. Being closer to a house, if you can be in a fenced area, that's better. That might keep out bears or other predators that are going to be a problem. But pick out a spot for camping. Make do shelters. If you're lucky, you may have a tent. But tarps, ropes, duct tape, there's all kinds of things that you can use to create a temporary shelter. So if you are lucky enough to have a shed or a garage that is safer than the house, then you can work on creating a shelter-in-place camp there. And like I said, these are just things, and I know I'm closing my eyes a lot because it helps me to actually think and process through these things while I'm blabbering off at the mouth. Now, bushcraft materials, if you have nothing else, and it would be great if you had tarps or rolled plastic, rope, all of these things. If you have them in your house and you think that you are going to have to go into a bushcraft situation, it's always nice to have zip ties, or fantastic. But ultimately in bushcrafting, you use natural materials, so you've got poles, grass for bedding. All of the stuff, of course, needs to be dry. And you may have to dry some things around the fire without creating a, fire is going to be another thing. Mud is a good building or insulator. If it's clean mud, you don't want to get mud out of the river that could be toxic. But you can create a shelter. Now, when you're creating a bushcraft shelter, you don't want a low place, because if it rains, it's going to run in, and you're going to have your shelter's going to be full of water. I've been there, done that. So you want to make sure it's the highest place that you can pick, because if there's higher ground, the water's going to run in. You don't want any higher ground. You want the top of the hill. Now, you can ditch around to keep water from running in if you get rain or whatever, but a knoll is ideal. And you want to cover the ground in some way. Now, you may not be able to have plastic film, but if you can clear the ground of rocks, stones, and then if you've got grass, that's all fine and good. If it's not going to last long, sometimes hay or something laid out can help, but you have to use common sense in all this stuff. So but you're in a bushcraft situation, you're going to use natural materials, and essentially it boils down to a structure. So you may have bendable poles or straight poles, small poles. Having a hatchet would be absolutely invaluable, but having a knife, or just having, you can, as long as they're not too rotten, you can sometimes break off poles that are dead to kind of help. But you need something over your head and something to hold in the heat. Now, staying warm and dry is super, super important. I mean, if I was in a situation where it was just me, I would try to make sure that I was first warm, having a blanket or a coat, or having your skin covered, especially at night, and then wrapping yourself with a bit of plastic to keep out any kind of weather or something coming in. You do want to be careful that you don't keep yourself so warm that you start sweating, because sweating and then it gets cold and you can get hypothermia. So using common sense is important. If at all possible, have a change of clothes, dry socks, dry underwear, coats, jackets. We have all of these things in our lives for a reason. And if you take off to find something better and don't take any of these things with you, it's going to make your life really, really miserable, because it doesn't take long being cold to be miserable. Okay, so for staying dry, just a little bit of fire, a candle will help you, even in a small area. If you've made a small tent, a candle will sometimes dry the air out a little bit. It's great if you're going to have matches, lighters, or something to make a spark. So like I said, plastic sheetings. You can, if you have saved up any kind of survival skills, there's the aluminum foil type blankets that will hold heat in. You're thinking about having a fire, which we will talk about. You're thinking about insulation. which could be, you know, your coat, sweater, it could be a blanket. Then there's moisture proofing, which is going to be any kind of plastic membrane. You can cut a hole for your arms and head in a garbage bag that will help you. You can use pieces of plastic like that you can put down in your shoes. Make sure your feet are dry, your socks are dry. Put them down in your shoes, put your shoe down in there so that your shoe, if it does get some water in it, your foot's not getting wet. Yeah, beware of sweat. And being warm and dry, and like I said, this is all a bunch of common sense, but finding ways to stay warm and dry is super, super important. And getting cold for just a little bit can lead to a head cold. It can lead to a sinus infection that can go through the whole family or the whole group. You need to protect yourself. Having something on your head is invaluable, whether it would be a boggin, a cap, or something, because you lose most of your heat through your head. Part of sheltering in place would be collecting things that you need, like firewood, tinder from the woods, collecting anything that can be used, you know, if you were lucky enough to have blackberries or some kind of edible food, which I will try to find a video on woodland foods that are safe. If you are somebody that collected mushrooms, morels, or morels, however you pronounce it, if you're somebody that knows mushrooms. But if you do not know wild foods and herbs, I really, really wish I had my daughter's experience on this, because she is the healer, she's the herbalist, she is the medical technician. She took charge of that whenever we were out in the wilderness, and it is invaluable to have someone that has educated themselves and they know how to be the so-called unofficial, but they're the medic of the group. If you're lucky enough to have someone like that, a wise woman, a grandmother that's had the experience, it is amazing, and I wish she was part of this video right now, because she could give you all kinds of assistance in that area. But when you're sheltering in place, you do need to collect supplies as you can. Kind of think forward to the future. Now, I'm going to talk just a little bit about water purification. This is very general, very standard, and if you, I am going to try to link some videos. So, collecting water, if you have a tarp, that you don't want a tarp that's like rotted and falling apart. So, water collection is a big thing. And just being out in the woods or being out in a bushcraft situation, collecting water is a little bit more difficult, especially if you don't have supplies. You need rain, of course, and the last thing you want when you're in a flood situation is more rain. But especially after there's been a lot of rain, a lot of times there will be clear water that is still collected in leaves. You know, if there's something sitting outside, an open glass or something, there may be water collected in it. But it's kind of like a searching thing, you know, an Easter egg hunt to search for water in certain times. If you do have rain, you can collect rain with any kind of impervious, like film, like garbage bags, tarps, whatever. I remember we were living in tents at one point, and we had a tarp stretched over the tents, and there was certain, you know, the tarp wasn't completely straight all the way around. There were certain valleys, whenever it rained, the water would run off. And of course we were beginning our Homestead. So I went to the dollar store, I think it was, and I bought like laundry baskets that were like $1 a piece. I think I had something like 5 or 6 of them, and I lined those with black plastic garbage bags. And every time it rained, even just a little bit of rain, I would collect all of that water, and I used it for laundry and bathing and all sorts of things. We generally kept drinking water in that situation, but you may not have drinking water. So, let's go on. So, if you collect water in any way, shape, or form, and you are going to drink it, it needs to be purified. Now, if you're going to keep water for any extended period of time, like in a bottle or something, the rule of thumb is 2 drops of chlorine bleach per quart of water. That, you know, it would be 8 drops from a dropper, and you would want to measure this per gallon. But if you have collected water even out of leaves, you need to, the best thing to do is boil it if you're going to use it right away. And so any kind of, even a tin can, if you can boil water in something, it will kill the germs. Now, if it is water that is somewhat muddy, or it seems somewhat sullied, or it has some kind of debris in it, there are several ways of filtering water out before you actually boil it. So you can take a 2-liter bottle, put some kind of a cloth if you have it in there. If not, just put some kind of something in the, like, cut the bottom of it off and put something in there to block the hole, and then start with a layer of a little bit more like coarse rock, so that, you know, the rest of the stuff doesn't fall through. Then go with sand, fine stone if you could, then more coarse rock again. You can even put a layer of like clean grass at the top, but this should filter out the debris. And always, if you have a bit of t-shirt or a handkerchief or a bandana or any kind of cloth, if you can then filter it through that to get out any of the smaller debris, then you can boil it. But water needs to be treated. Water from a toxic river flood is really, really bad, because it's going to have all kinds of chemicals and pathogens. And even water from a clear stream can be a bad thing, because you never know when an animal has drowned it upstream, or there's something that's laying in the water that could be toxic and could make you sick. So you have to be really careful about your water, but you can find sources of water even in bushcraft situations generally, unless you're in some sort of a drought or something. Then you have to have other means, but in this situation, I think this is good. So fire. If you want a fire, of course, you have to be careful with fire that you don't catch the woods on fire, you don't start a grass fire, or you don't catch your house on fire. Anytime you use fire, you have to do it with the utmost precaution. I'm sure that most people that are in these areas that are hit by Helene, the hurricane, are at least somewhat proficient with fire. But essentially, you need something to start the fire. So the fire is going to be either matches or friction equals fire. So if you have a piece of wire, say for instance, and you find a cracked limb, and you can run that back and forth in that limb and get that wire hot enough, it will catch tinder on fire. There's a lot of different ways that you can create enough heat And I'm sure I'm going to try to share some videos. I'm not going to get into it too much, but you need a fire source, and that can be just a match. You need tinder, which means something that's going to catch that fire. If you have a match, if you have a match and one Frito, that is enough to build a bonfire. Fritos are amazing. I know you want to eat them, but if you got a handful of Fritos in your pocket, the oils in the Fritos and the corn will get you ablaze about any time you want it, as long as you have a match or some sort of fire starter. Then after the tinder and you actually get a flame, then you're going to want little small kindling, little sticks and stuff, and then you go up from that to bigger kindling and bigger logs and so on and so forth. You build a fire very, very small, and it can start with a little handful of tinder and a spark, and then you go from there. I'm not going into the specific details of creating a fire. Hopefully you're going to have matches or a lighter or something like that, but if you don't, there are primitive ways of doing it, and if you have a cell phone, I am going to try to share some videos in the description below. Okay, so there are certain things that help with that, and like I said, candles can be helpful. The wax from candles will set a flame. A Frito, or even a good dry potato chip that's kind of greasy, will help. You need dry tinder. You need a flammable starter, which is going to be a match, you know, a spark or something, and then you build it gradually. Now, going on, let me see here. When you going back a little bit, when you're setting up your shelter, whether it be a tent or something, you want to consider where you want to be somewhere where, if you're going to build a fire, you need access to wood. And if you don't have a chainsaw or something, having access to, you know, poles that are broken off, that are dry, or a tree that, not a huge tree, but a small enough tree where it's got dead limbs that you could pull off. You want to stay away from the water's edge, of course, and all of you have had way too much water already. You want to stay away from widowmakers. You do not want to put any kind of a shelter under a tree that's got dead limbs. And this can be hard to tell in the wintertime when all the leaves are off anyway. But you need to try to stay away from any trees that could drop limbs on you. And you need to stay away from wildlife trails, especially in North Carolina and some of those states. You've got bears, you've got mountain lions, you've got cougars. This is why I'm telling you that possibly it's a good idea, if you can get out and you can be rescued, allow them to take you with them so you will be safer. But if you stay off the animal paths, or if you're in a fenced area, you are going to be somewhat safer. If you have a fenced yard or dog lot or anything, you're better off if you're fenced. And you need to, if you can have a windbreak, like if it would be better if you had a little bit of a windbreak, because if the wind or another storm comes or something like that, you know, you may be holding on, and we have actually done this. You may be holding on to your tent poles to keep it from blowing away. So a little bit of wind cover is good. That's something to think about. Something to cover the ground, whether it would be a tarp or something, would be good. I already touched on that, but I just thought I would touch on that again because I had it in my notes. This is a very disjointed, unorganized video, I know, and I hope that it's being helpful. So, I'm going to, let me look here real quick. Okay, so I'm going to talk about light. So if you have candles out of your house, or you have flashlights, if you have a store of batteries, all that's going to be great, but you may not have that. So there are certain ways that, and like I said, I'll try to share a video below, but you can take a little bit of Crisco, a little bit of corn oil, make something out of a shoestring or a piece of twine in some way, a little hemp string or something, and make a wick. And just, if you've got a little saucer, lay that in the oil, let it absorb in, light it. It will create a light for you. That's a primitive light. But if you don't have a, you could have candles, a primitive light of some sort, which just essentially requires a saucer or a plate and a little bit of oil and some sort of wick, and lighting the wick. If you use any kind of oil, don't use fuel, don't use kerosene, don't use gasoline, of course. Don't use anything that's got a quick burn. If you want something like vegetable oil, old bacon grease, Crisco, olive oil, something that is going to have a low burn. And something for a wick, like I said, it can be a piece of cloth, it can be a piece of hemp string, it can be a shoestring. And so also, you need to consider some flashlights. Check and see if there's any push lights that are in your closets that still work, that have batteries in them. Battery powered Christmas lights are something to consider, but this is if you have access to batteries. Now, if you're in this situation and you need to be rescued, and trust me, if you don't have your basic necessities and you don't have health care, you don't have food, you need to be rescued. There's a couple of things, and you have no cell phone. There's a couple of things. If you don't have a cell phone, you're probably not watching this video, but just for good measure, you can use smoke signals. And essentially this would mean being out in an open place where you can build a fire. Now, you're not necessarily going to want to use a blanket like they use. You're going to catch your blanket on fire, but what you could do is have a piece of cardboard, or have your jacket or whatever, and be poofing that fire, which is going to send a smoke signal into the air. You can use a mirror. And if you hear an airplane or a helicopter or something, get out with a mirror and send it that way, and be shining it towards them so they see the light from it, from the sun shining on the mirror. You'd have to do that in a very specific way, but it's possible. And then the old-fashioned desert island thing, where you're creating a very large SOS. So this could be from using sticks, poles, it could be written in the dirt, it could be written with a can of spray paint, it could be actually kind of torched or burnt into a grassy area. But if you create a large enough SOS where they can see you from the sky, that will help if you have no communication. Okay, so I'm going to move on with just a few more things, and I'm going to talk first about injuries. And some injuries, naturally, if you can get access to emergency services, that is the first thing that you need to do. But say, for instance, you have bleeding. Bleeding can be stopped through packing cloth, or preferably sterile stuff into an open wound, and then applying pressure on it can often stop the bleeding. If you are forced, if pressure is not working in any form, you don't always have to pack it. Sometimes just putting pressure on it will stop it. But if pressure doesn't help, and then again, I wish I had my daughter, because she would be so much better at teaching this than me. She is the medic and the healer of the family, but she's not with me. So if you have to use a tourniquet in the form of a belt or a rope or something like that, you can only leave it on for a period of time. The person, it may slow the blood flow, and that will be good, but the person that has the injury needs to be able to feel their toes. And if they can't feel their toes, it's a very short period of time that you can leave it on there. You could gradually, not all at once, but gradually loosen the tourniquet just to see if the blood flow has been stopped. And if you're having immediate emergency services arrived, it'll be fine. You can leave the tourniquet on or just keep applying pressure till they come. Basic medical, what do they call it? Emergency medical skills would be great if you had this, but I'm just mentioning this just in case you have no experience at all. But putting your hands on wound and pushing down, or tying a rope or a belt or something around a leg, if a person, especially if it's really bad and you think it's going to bleed out, you would need to use a tourniquet. If you're dressing any kind of a wound, of course, if you can, use gloves or wash your hands in alcohol. If you can't do that, try washing your hands really, really good with soap. But you need to be as sterile as possible when you're doing this. A wound that is not terribly deep, just cleaning it really good with soap and water is probably sufficient. If you have antibiotic ointment, that is going to be fantastic. If you don't have antibiotic ointment, maybe you would just have petroleum jelly if you're not allergic to it. Some of this is trial and error. But the main thing you want to do is clean the wound, keep the wound moist, and that's where you don't want it to dry out. You don't want the bandage to stick to it. You would want it to stay moist, as with antibiotic ointment or a petroleum gel or something like that. You want to have it covered so no dirt can get in it. And that's the three main basic things for dressing a wound. If you have a wound that is gapped open, if you have any kind of tape or something that you could actually pull it together, say the bleeding stopped but it's still kind of gapping open, you need to try to pull it together a little bit. If you have tape or anything that you can tie around it, even when you put the bandage on it, kind of tie it where it will pull together. You don't want, if you are in an emergency situation, you do not want to actually, and if you think you're going to be rescued at any time soon, you don't want to use sutures, especially not underlying sutures, but pulling the wound together and tightening it up before you put the bandage on. Make sure you haven't cut off circulation. It would be ideal because it will help with the healing if the skin is at least pulled together. And the next thing I want you to be aware of, and this is ongoing, maintaining this is just like ongoing. You're going to have to be vigilant and always be watching. But the other thing that I want to talk about is possible illnesses or diseases. Now, I got tick fever out in the woods, and I think we had been out a couple of months, and we went out in like March, and it was starting to get warm, and the ticks started and even though we had shelter, I mean, I could literally, things loved me, I could literally step out in the woods for like 5 minutes and I'd come back in and I'd have like 1 tick per minute. And they just were so numerous. I've had as many as 20 and 25 on me at once. It got so bad, even with my daughter medically taking care of me, making sure that they weren't getting infected, doctoring them, and I'm allergic to Band-Aids, so that makes it even worse. But at one point, I think I had 80 or 100 actual wounds, and the tick bites were actually abscessing for me. So eventually they had to take me to the hospital, and I was diagnosed with an undisclosed tick fever, and that ultimately led to us backing out from the whole deal. And So we tried all kinds of tick repellents and things like that. So ticks can be one of the most notorious, but trust me, you do not want to be in an area where you're getting multiple tick bites and this go on for any length of time, because you will get sick from it. You have to be careful of spiders and snakes, and if you live in that area, you know this very well. North Carolina and all those eastern Appalachian and Blue Ridge, all of that is going to be rife with snakes. You have to be very, very careful. Wearing high top boots is ideal. If you don't have that, if you can wrap rags around your legs so that you are protected. I know in old times when my grandmother went out to pick blackberries, she would soak strips of rags in kerosene. They called it coal oil back then, but she would dip it in kerosene and she would tie it around her ankles, and that seemed to repel the insects. So, but you have to be careful of all of that stuff. Of course, there you're going to have to be careful of bears. If there's any residual poison ivy, you definitely want to stay away from it. And in that area, you should know leaves of 3, let it be. You have to be careful of anaphylactic shock. So this can happen through touching certain plants. It can happen through getting a bee sting. It can happen, you know, and if you are in a wilderness situation and you get anaphylactic shock, you may not make it. And I can't really tell you how to overcome in a situation like that. I would suggest, if you're watching this video and you have access to YouTube, and you think that that's a possibility if you're allergic to bees, look up a video that tells you this. Be very careful of gastrointestinal issues. If you're gluten intolerant, don't eat gluten. If you are allergic to certain things that could mess you up in that way, give you diarrhea or vomiting, stay away from that. Eat foods that are simple, that aren't going to make you sick. Make sure that any wild foods that you gather are washed and safe. This isn't the right time of year, but just say if you were doing blackberries, especially mushrooms, you have to know the species of mushroom, and you have to know. The only ones that I truly know are the morels and the puffballs, and puffballs are very easy to distinguish because they just look like, you know, whatever size they are, they just look like a big white ball. Those are best when I don't think that there's any that mimic that. And, you know, so if you find a mushroom that's a big white ball, you're probably good to eat it. And they are pretty good. So be very careful of gastro, and you do not want to, the first thing that's going to cause this is pathogens in unclean water. This is why I say that you have to sanitize your water, boil your water in some way. Airborne diseases, you have to be careful from that, or sicknesses, because you know it's possible to have chemicals floating in the air. Certain things that you burn in the fire may cause chemical reaction. My family has MCS, which is multiple chemical sensitivities, so even if we open a package and there's kind of like that leathery smell, or it feels like it needs to gas off, those will make us sick for even weeks at a time. If someone gets a cold, it will spread through the group, so cold and flu needs to be watched for. And if a person has a cold or flu, you need to make sure that everybody else washes their hands, stays away from them, no sharing of cups or anything else, and keep that person somewhat quarantined until it passes. You do not want a group of people having colds, especially not flu. And be very, very careful of toxic water or contaminated water. And there are certain plants out there that are toxic, and I could, you know, you may look something up online and find a you know, an exhaustive list of certain plants, maybe even a field guide or whatever, but there are certain plants that, you know, could make your water toxic, or if you come and touch it, or, you know, it's something you have to be very careful. Now, I know I've rambled on and this has been a very long video, but I wanted to touch base with all those things. I'm going to try to very quickly share as many links of YouTube videos as I can, but this is not exhaustive, and you can very well, if you're watching this video and you have a cell phone, you can just look up these topics individually: purifying water in the wilderness, purifying water in your home, doing without electricity, you know, all of that. So you can look up more, and I encourage you to look up enough so that you feel like you very clearly know what to do, because, as I said, I'm not an expert. I've just experienced a lot of things, including infants in the wilderness. So, small children in the wilderness. So, I do want to say, before I end this video, that all of you people that are in Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, any of the outlying areas and states, Tennessee, that are going through this, our prayers are with you. I am now away from home, living in New Mexico. I wish with all my heart that I could send money or volunteer. This is the only way that I've been able to feel like that I could reach out and be a benefit. But I just want to say that you are in our prayers. And if you are not a praying person, it's a good time to start. Believe in God. Through all of my experiences in life, and many of them have been hard, I have learned that I can trust God. He's always been there for me. He's always taken care of me in my stupidity, in my weakness, in my ignorance, and He is able. So trust Him. Trust Jesus Christ to bring you through this, and God the Father. And Lord, we just ask that you reach out to all of these communities, reach out to all of these people, especially those that may still be trying to survive on their own. And Lord, we just ask you that you would just lift them up, encourage them, give them the wisdom, the physical strength, and everything that they need, Lord. Help them to be rescued, help them to be found, help them to have the resources they need. And we give you all the praise and the glory and the honor for it. In Jesus' name we pray. And we will not forget you. I may have further videos. I'm going to go into prepping, and when we leave here, rather than buy, you know, that big comfortable home, I may end up just buying a homestead, getting land that is sufficient enough to cover all of our needs. So because this has stirred me up, and we don't know what's coming next, but I want to say that our hearts are with you, and I hope this is helpful. So until the next video, I love you all. Bye bye.